why your body itches and why scratching feels so good. Hello and welcome to the channel. Have you ever had one of those nights where you're lying in bed, minding your own business, and suddenly your leg itches? You scratch it, but now your arm itches, then your scalp, then your back, and now you're basically in a full body scratching symphony at 2 a.m. Why does that happen? And more importantly, why does scratching feel so good, even though we know it's not always helping? Let's dig into the weird, itchy world of neuroscience and psychology, because this simple universal experience is hiding some fascinating brain science underneath. Let's start with a common misconception. People often think itching is just a tiny pain, like a downgraded pain signal. But that's not quite right. For a long time, scientists did think itch and pain were on the same neural spectrum. Basically, that itch was a mild activation of the same nerve fibers that transmit pain. But research over the past 2 decades has shown that itch actually has its own dedicated wiring in your nervous system. Your skin is packed with specialized sensory nerve endings called C fibers. Some of these are so-called nociceptors, pain receptors. They pick up pain, heat, or tissue damage. Others are specifically tuned to detect itchy stimuli, things like histamine from a mosquito bite, or certain chemicals, or even mechanical irritants. These itch-specific fibers are called proreceptors. When one of these is triggered, say by a bug bite, the proreceptor sends a signal up to your spinal cord where it joins a pathway called the spinothalamic tract, which heads up to your brain. But here's the cool part. The spinal cord actually has a separate route for itch signals than for pain. So pain and itch run in parallel, but they are not the same. They have their own receptors, neurons, and brain regions. It's like your brain's got a separate hotline just for itch alerts. Okay, but why do we even have the ability to itch? From an evolutionary standpoint, itching is actually a brilliant survival mechanism. It's your body's way of detecting small localized threats like insects, parasites, or irritants, and prompting you to remove them. Imagine you're a prehistoric human chilling by a fire and a mosquito lands on your arm. The bite triggers histamine release, which activates those itch-sensitive nerve endings. You scratch it, and boom, you've just removed the mosquito, maybe even before it had a chance to transmit a nasty infection. If you were in the tropics, that nasty infection could be malaria. So, itching evolved as a kind of micro-defensive reflex. It's the body saying, hey, there's something tiny and possibly gross on you. Get rid of it now. It's not for big injuries or deep wounds. That's what pain is for. Itch is for the surface level annoyances. But of course, your brain doesn't know when to stop once it's started, and that's where things get complicated. Here's the paradox. Scratching feels amazing, but it can also make things worse. When you scratch, you're actually activating pain fibers in the skin, the same ones that respond to heat or injury. The mild pain signal travels to your spinal cord and temporarily shuts down the itch pathway. Basically, your nervous system can't process both signals at once, so the pain overrides the itch, giving you that instant glorious wave of relief. But the problem is, your brain likes that feeling, so you do it again and again. Meanwhile, the scratching is damaging the skin, causing more inflammation, releasing more histamine, which triggers even more itch signals. Congratulations, you've just entered the itch-scratch cycle, a neurological feedback loop where relief and irritation keep chasing each other in circles. It's like your nervous system accidentally programmed a self-sabotaging pleasure button. So, what's happening upstairs in your brain when you scratch? When researchers put people in MRI scanners and had them scratch an itch, yes, this is a real study, they found that scratching activates the reward centers of the brain, specifically the striatum and part of the midbrain, the same regions that light up when you eat chocolate, win money on the lottery, or scroll through TikTok. It's literally a dopamine hit. Your brain goes, nice work, you solved the problem, even though the problem might come right back. That's why chronic itch conditions like eczema or psoriasis can become so psychologically torturous. People know scratching will make it worse, but the relief is so rewarding in the moment that it's nearly impossible to resist. It's a bit like an addiction. You're chasing that dopamine spike even though it's damaging long term. This phenomenon is heightened in the ear. You know what I'm talking about, right? The sheer pleasure that can be obtained by scratching your inner ear, or at least the part just before you get to the eardrum. Yeah, but anyway, that's enough about me. So, not all itches are created equal, right? Let's talk about the different categories of itch, because they tell us a lot about how versatile and frustrating this system is. First up, we have the dermatological itch. This is, of course, the classic type from insect bites, dry skin, or allergic reactions. These usually involve histamine release, which triggers itch-specific nerve fibers. Antihistamines work great here because they block those histamine receptors. And then you have the neuropathic itch. Sometimes itch comes from nerve damage or misfiring of nerves, like in shingles. There's a really horrible complication of shingles called a Ramsay Hunt. I've probably touched upon this on previous videos of mine. Multiple sclerosis is another cause of this type of itch. It's absolutely devastating because it's non-remittent. It's just persistent, and it causes absolute hell. Or you can also get this after spinal cord injuries. The nerves themselves are sending false itch signals even when there's nothing on the skin. Now, this is akin to the kind of itch you can sometimes get from a phantom limb. Imagine, God forbid, an arm or a leg has been cut off, but you still feel an itch coming from that absent limb, but you don't know where to scratch because the limb is no longer there. Imagine the psychological torture. So, exactly, this is exactly why amputees can feel this phantom itch in a limb that's no longer there. The brain's itch map is still active, even without the body part, because the system runs on memory. The nerve endings are full of memory. There is a theory that it's this kind of memory that lingers on even after someone passes, and this is where science meets with a little bit of superstition, spirituality, I don't know what you want to call it, but this is where sometimes we have stories where somebody who has been reincarnated, or their story seems so, talks about certain memories, bodily sensations that really could not be explained any other way except through lingering memory from the body that never quite died with the person, right? Anyway, before I get too lost in the rabbit hole here on this topic, let's get back on track. The third itch is the psychogenic itch. This is the itch driven by the mind. Stress, anxiety, or obsessive focus can all cause or worsen itching. You've probably noticed this one yourself. You see someone else itch, and suddenly you're itchy too. That's called contagious itch, and it's a real measurable phenomenon. Let's talk about that. Why can you literally catch an itch from someone else? You're watching someone scratch their arm, and suddenly you feel an urge to scratch yours. This is a fascinating mix of psychology and neuroscience. Studies show that when we observe someone else itching, our mirror neuron system lights up, the same network involved in empathy and imitation. Your brain is basically simulating what it sees. It doesn't fully distinguish between seeing and doing, especially for bodily sensations. Researchers have even found that watching videos of bugs crawling on skin can trigger itch sensations in the same brain areas involved in actual itching. So if you're feeling itchy right now, just from listening to me talk about it, congratulations, your mirror neurons are working perfectly. Now, most normal itches come and go. But for millions of people, itching becomes chronic, lasting months or even years. Chronic itch isn't just a skin problem, it's a brain problem. When someone has the itch scratch cycle, or rather when the itch scratch cycle goes on for too long, the brain's sensory circuits literally start to rewire. Areas like the somatosensory cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex become hyperactive, amplifying itch perception even when there's no real stimulus. And because the reward centers keep reinforcing scratching, the brain learns to crave it. That's why chronic itch is so hard to treat. You just can't fix the skin. You have to retrain the brain. In fact, some researchers are exploring using cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, or even virtual reality to help patients break the psychological side of the itch loop. It's not all in your head, but part of it definitely is. Here's another interesting twist. Your emotional state can make you itch more. When you're stressed, your body releases inflammatory molecules like interleukins and substance P, which can sensitize your itch receptors. Interleukins are heavily involved in the inflammatory pathway, and they're part of the immune police system of the body, so to speak. Substance P is a kind of neurotransmitter that actually transmits pain. So there is a little bit of overlap here. And this phenomenon may explain why people notice that their eczema or hives flare up during exams, during work deadlines, or even during arguments. Stress makes your immune system more reactive, and your skin is part of that system. It's often called the third brain because it's loaded with nerve endings and immune cells that talk directly to your central nervous system, your brain. There is even a term for this relationship. It's called the brain-skin axis. It explains why psychological stress can literally make you itch. And once you start scratching, the brain rewards you, making you even more stressed when you try to stop. It's the perfect storm of biology and psychology. Let's zoom in on that bizarre pleasure we feel when scratching. Scientists call this counterstimulation, when you replace one unpleasant sensation, the itch, with another, pain, that feels satisfying because it resolves the first one. Are you confused so far? The key players here are two brain regions, the periaqueductal gray, the PAG, in the midbrain, and the nucleus accumbens, which is part of the brain's reward system. When you scratch, the PAG releases serotonin. Recognize that hormone? That hormone, by the way, plays a big role in depression. Now, serotonin dampens the itch response in the spinal cord, but ironically, the serotonin can also make the itch come back stronger later, which is why scratching sometimes feels like chasing your tail. It's a neurochemical tug of war, temporary bliss followed by rebound itch. That's why dermatologists always say, don't scratch, but your brain says, just one more time. There are some truly wild cases in the medical literature where itching becomes pathological. For example, we've talked about this before, the neuropathic pruritus or neuropathic itch, where patients experience constant itching from nerve damage. Some people have even scratched through the skin to the point of bleeding because their brain simply won't turn off the signal. One famous case involved a woman who had a small stroke that damaged a part of her brain's sensory cortex. She developed an uncontrollable itch on her scalp, so severe that she scratched through to the bone in her sleep. These extreme cases show how powerful and stubborn the itch sensation can be when the brain's control systems malfunction. It's not just an itch, it can literally become a neurological disorder. Now let's talk about itching and tickling. These are surprisingly related. Both involve light, repetitive stimulation of the skin, and both trigger reflexive movements and emotional responses. But while itch makes you want to remove the stimulus, tickle makes you laugh, a weird social response. Interestingly, both sensations activate overlapping brain regions involving the somatosensory cortex and the insula. Some scientists think tickle evolved as a kind of social itch, strengthening bonds through touch and laughter, while itch remained the solitary self-defense version against bugs and insects and poisonous substances. So next time you're scratching your arm, just remember you're engaging in an ancient ritual. Have you ever noticed that you itch more at night before bed? There are a few reasons for that. Your body temperature naturally rises at night, which increases blood flow to the skin and can make itch receptors more sensitive. Your cortisol levels, which suppress inflammation, are lowest at night, so histamine effects become stronger. And when you're lying still with fewer distractions, your brain has more bandwidth to notice minor sensations. That's why nighttime itch is such a common complaint for people with eczema, allergies, or dry skin. Your brain basically amplifies sensory noise when everything else quiets down. There are certain diseases that cause itching. Let's not forget those. The first, very important, is liver disease. When bile acids build up in the blood, they can trigger severe itching. Kidney failure can also do this, and this is where toxins accumulate in the body due to the kidney being unable to excrete them through the urine. So these toxins accumulate in the body and can cause irritative nerve endings. Iron deficiency as well, thyroid disease, and even cancer can cause generalized itching without a rash. So, if you've got persistent unexplained itching, it's not something to ignore. It could be your body trying to get your attention. Humans aren't alone in this. Animals itch too, and they seem to enjoy it just as much as humans do. If you've ever watched a cat do that weird blissful face scratch with its back paw, or a bear up against a tree, that's the same neurological mechanism at work. In fact, some of the earliest itch studies were done on monkeys. Researchers noticed they'd scratch themselves spontaneously after being given histamine, just like humans. So this is not just about a human psychology, it's a deeply conserved mammalian reflex. So, next time you get an itch, remember, you're feeling the result of millions of years of evolution, finely tuned nerve circuits, and a reward system that just wants you to feel like you're doing something useful. Maybe you'll resist the urge to scratch, maybe you won't. Either way, now you know why it feels so satisfying when you do. If you liked this deep dive into the neuroscience of itching, hit that like button before your dopamine levels drop and subscribe for more medical mysteries explained in plain English. Because in medicine, even the smallest sensations can reveal the biggest stories about how your brain works. If you have any general questions, not only about itching, but about anything else in the huge domain that is medicine, feel free to ask a doc.